It started innocently enough, though even at the time I knew there was something strange about it. The summer air clung to the walls of the house, making every movement slow, every sound more noticeable than it should have been. When Ethan arrived to stay for a few weeks, the house felt different, almost unsettled. He was my nephew, my husband's sister's son, yet the way he moved through the rooms made me feel as though I were being watched, studied, almost pursued. I remember one evening hearing his footsteps behind me in the long hallway, the sound of them sharp against the wooden floor, and a strange thought came to me, that it felt like I was being hunted, not in the modern sense, but as though something primal had awoken, as if we had slipped back into prehistoric times. I shook it off, of course, but the thought never entirely left me. Ethan was only a few years past 20, still at that age where boldness and recklessness shine together, and he carried himself as if the world were his. I saw traces of his mother in him, but I also saw something else, something David never seemed to notice. My husband was preoccupied, as usual. His mind lived in conference calls, in emails that demanded his midnight replies, in the world of business travel and deadlines. At dinner he nodded, asked polite questions, and returned to his phone the moment he thought no one was watching. I had grown used to it, the quiet emptiness of being married to a man present in body but absent in spirit. Ethan, though, filled the silence differently. He had a way of watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, his gaze lingering too long, a hint of playfulness in it, almost a dare. The first night he was with us after dinner, he followed me into the kitchen under the pretense of asking about dessert. He leaned against the counter, close enough for me to feel the heat of him, and smiled in that careless way of his. "You always keep this place spotless," he said, his tone light but his eyes steady on mine. I laughed it off, brushing a towel over my hands, pretending not to notice how close he stood. But I noticed everything. There were other small things too. The way he held a gaze longer than necessary, the way he brushed past me when there was plenty of room to avoid it, the way his voice softened when he asked about my day, as if he actually wanted to hear the answer. These were things I had not felt in a long time. Attention, curiosity, presence. I told myself it was nothing, that I was only imagining what wasn't there. Yet the truth settled inside me like a secret I couldn't shake. One afternoon I stepped out onto the porch, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass. Ethan came from behind the house, his shirt clinging to him with sweat, his hair messy from some half-hearted attempt at yard work. He grinned, tossed the rake aside, and without warning darted toward me as if it were a game. "You're too slow," he called, chasing me across the yard. I hadn't run in years, but something in me moved before I could think. My heart raced, not just from the exertion, but from the sharp thrill that pulsed through me. His footsteps pounded behind mine, quick and insistent, and I couldn't help but think again of that prehistoric image, predator and prey locked in some timeless dance. When I finally stumbled to a stop near the fence, laughing breathlessly, he leaned on the railing just beside me. His smile was boyish, but his eyes told another story. For a moment too long we stayed there, breathing the same thick summer air, our laughter trailing off into something unspoken. Then he looked away, picking at the wood of the fence as though the moment hadn't happened at all. That night, as David sat at the dining table with his laptop open, half listening to my words, I thought of Ethan's eyes, the way they had pinned me in place, the way I had felt my pulse quicken not from fear but from something dangerously close to desire. I hated myself for it, for letting the thought stay, for letting it bloom in the quiet corners of my mind. But I also couldn't deny that I felt alive in a way I hadn't for years. When I lay in bed beside my husband later, his steady breathing filling the dark room, I turned on my side and stared at the ceiling. The image came back again, Ethan's footsteps behind me, the sound of pursuit, my own laughter mingling with fear. It was wrong, of course it was wrong. Yet deep inside, a part of me longed for it to happen again. I told myself it was only play, nothing more than the antics of a boy who hadn't yet outgrown his need for mischief. But the memory of Ethan chasing me through the yard stayed with me longer than it should have. At first I tried to laugh it off, to think of it as harmless fun, but every time I replayed the sound of his footsteps and the look in his eyes, something stirred in me that I didn't want to name. I caught myself watching him in quiet moments, listening to the way he spoke, how he filled the silence with easy confidence. He was David's nephew, family, and yet there was nothing familial about the way my body responded to his presence. David, of course, remained blind to it all. His work swallowed him whole. Most evenings he sat across from me at the table, nodding absently, typing with one hand while pretending to listen with the other. He went on business trips twice that month, leaving the house quieter than ever, except for Ethan's restless energy. Sometimes I wished David would notice, would look at me the way Ethan did. But David's eyes belonged to his screens, his clients, his endless projects. I had stopped expecting more from him years ago. Ethan, on the other hand, noticed everything. The way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous. The way I avoided his gaze when we were too close. The way I sometimes forgot to answer when he asked a question, lost in thought. He teased me about it. "You always look like you're a million miles away," he said once, leaning against the kitchen counter while I washed dishes. His tone was light, but his eyes lingered on me with a kind of intensity one didn't know how to answer. I laughed it off, told him he was imagining things, but inside I felt the tremor of guilt. One evening, after dinner, he suggested a walk in the yard. The sun had just dipped behind the trees, leaving the air thick with twilight. Fireflies sparked in the grass, and the world seemed hushed, as if holding its breath. He walked beside me at first, hands shoved into his pockets, his voice easy and playful. Then, without warning, he darted ahead and turned back, grinning. "Come on," he called. "Don't let me catch you standing still." It was ridiculous, childish even, but I felt my heart quicken as he started toward me. My first instinct was to run, and I did, the grass soft under my feet, my breath coming fast. His footsteps pounded after mine, steady and relentless, just like before. And again the thought came to me, prehistoric times, predator and prey, the old dance of instinct. Except this time, I wasn't sure who was chasing whom. He caught up to me near the oak tree, his hand brushing against my arm as I stumbled to a stop. For a moment, too close, too breathless, we stood facing each other. His grin faltered, his eyes searching mine in the dim light. I felt the weight of what hovered between us, thick as the summer air. I wanted to speak, to break the tension, but my voice wouldn't come. He looked at me as though he could see through every wall I had ever built, as though he already knew the answer to the question neither of us dared to ask. Then, just as suddenly, he stepped back, shoving his hands into his pockets again, his grin returning. "You're not as fast as I thought," he said, teasing. The spell was broken, but the echo of it stayed. That night, I lay awake in bed while David slept beside me. My mind returned again and again to the oak tree, to the look in Ethan's eyes, to the electric charge that had pulsed between us. I told myself nothing had happened, that I had done nothing wrong, but my body betrayed me with every quickened heartbeat, every restless thought. Emotional betrayal felt just as heavy as the physical, and I couldn't escape the guilt. The next day, Ethan brushed past me in the hallway, close enough that his shoulder grazed mine. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. The silence said more than words could. Later in the kitchen, he leaned in too close when reaching for a glass, his arm brushing mine again. I pretended not to notice, but every nerve in my body was aware of him. He knew it too. I saw it in the faint smile that tugged at his lips as he turned away. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that he was simply young and careless, that his nearness meant nothing. But each day the line blurred further, the distance between what was proper and what was forbidden shrinking until I could barely see it anymore. I felt trapped, not by him, but by my own desires, my own weaknesses. When David left for another trip, the house felt unbearably empty. Ethan filled the space with his presence, his laughter echoing down the halls, his footsteps always somewhere near. I told myself to keep busy, to avoid being alone with him, but somehow the opposite kept happening. Every brush of his hand, every glance held too long, every playful chase in the yard pulled me further into a place I didn't want to go. And yet I kept going. By the end of the week, I knew I was no longer running away. I was running toward something, though I refused to admit it aloud. The rain came one evening without warning, sudden and heavy, drumming against the windows and filling the house with its restless noise. David was away again. His suitcase gone from the corner of the bedroom. His absence stretched out like an empty space beside me. The storm had made the air cooler, though the house itself still carried the weight of summer heat. I was in the kitchen, lights low, listening to the rain when I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't need to turn to know it was Ethan. His presence had become familiar in a way I tried to deny, the rhythm of his movements etched into me. He leaned against the doorway, casual, as though there was nothing unusual about finding me there alone. But there was something in his silence, the way he stood watching, that made the room feel smaller. "You always look like you're waiting for something," he said at last. His voice low, nearly drowned out by the storm. I forced a laugh, trying to deflect, but the sound cracked too easily. "Waiting for the rain to stop," I said, but even I didn't believe it. He stepped closer, not quickly, but with the steady certainty of someone who knew the distance between us had already been crossed in ways neither of us would admit. My hands trembled against the counter, and I gripped the edge as though it could anchor me. The storm outside grew louder, the thunder rolling through the walls, and still he came nearer until he stood just behind me. I could feel the heat of him, close enough that the space between us seemed alive. "Why do you keep running?" he asked softly. The words struck me harder than the thunder. It was the question I had been asking myself, in the dark, in the quiet, when David lay beside me unaware. Why did I run, when every part of me knew I wanted to be caught? I turned, finally, and for a moment we stood facing each other in the dim kitchen light, the storm wrapping around us like a shield from the rest of the world. His expression was unreadable, part challenge, part confession. My breath caught, and the silence pressed down, heavy and unbearable. For the first time he didn't smile, didn't tease. His eyes held mine, steady, demanding an answer I couldn't give. I felt the weight of the choice pressing against me. I thought of David, of our years together, of the life we had built with its steady routines and quiet emptiness. I thought of Ethan, of the laughter, the attention, the spark I hadn't felt in so long. My heart pounded with the pull of both guilt and longing. When he reached out, his hand hovering just near mine on the counter, I froze. I could have stepped back. I could have ended it then. Instead, I stood still, every nerve alive, waiting for the touch that would undo me. His fingers brushed against mine, featherlight, but the sensation shot through me as though the contact had been far more. It would have been so easy to let it happen, to give in to what we both wanted but neither of us dared say aloud. I felt the ground shifting under me, my own resolve cracking. And then, with a breath I didn't know I was holding, I pulled away. The look in his eyes when I stepped back was sharp, wounded, almost accusing. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, as though he had expected it all along. He turned and left the kitchen, his footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving me with the sound of the rain and the pounding of my own heart. That night I sat awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. David's side was empty, his absence making the silence louder. I thought of Ethan's eyes, the near touch of his hand, the storm outside that had felt like it belonged to us alone. I thought of what it meant to step back, whether it was strength or cowardice, and I wasn't sure which weighed heavier. When David returned 2 days later, he kissed my cheek distractedly, asked how the week had been, and unpacked his suitcase with the same absent focus he always carried. I answered with practiced ease, my voice steady, my smile measured. He didn't notice the pause in my words, the flicker in my eyes. He never noticed. But Ethan noticed. At dinner that night across the table, his gaze found mine and held it for 1 second too long. A quiet reminder of what had passed, of what had nearly happened. I lowered my eyes, pretending to focus on my plate, pretending not to feel the heat of his stare. I told myself it was over, that nothing had truly happened, that I had stopped it before the line was crossed. But the truth was heavier. The betrayal had already taken root, not in touch but in thought, in silence, in the unspoken language that had passed between us all summer. It was a betrayal David would never know, and Ethan would never forget, and I would carry like a shadow. I survived his chase, yes, but not untouched. The prehistoric game he had started left its mark, and I wondered if I would ever stop running. From him, from David, from myself.